Hey, book lovers. My name is Em, and I want to talk about books. And cats. Hey, book lovers. Sorry about the state of my voice. I am getting over a bit of a sore throat, and I'm just going to do my best to power through this episode. Also, real quick, this episode has a minor language warning to it. There's going to be some profanity. If this is not your cup of tea, it is pretty minor, and I will mention it when we get to it, so you can just kind of skip ahead. I find profanity interesting. Like, who decides what words are offensive in that way? Because honestly, swear words seem to be pretty ambiguous. They don't single out any specific type of person or trait necessarily. So what is it about them that makes them so offensive? I mean, it also changes depending on the country and, of course, like on smaller groups and at an individual level too. But just country-wise, compare like the UK and the US, our swears are not the same. I don't know, just random thoughts about words, I guess. I'm not trying to judge anyone. You decide what is okay for you personally. I started out writing with profanity and a lot of like violence just because I felt like it fit the stories I was trying to tell. But more and more, I rarely use it at this point. It's more like a seasoning for certain stories. And I only use it in my horror writing. I try to keep my fantasy books accessible to larger audiences. Anyway, this is going to be a bit of a different episode, but don't worry, there will be books and cats. But, you know, I enjoy other things as well, like podcasts. Duh. One thing I really like to do is check out other people's podcasts, like the smaller ones. I really enjoy big podcasts. There's some that I follow weekly. But there are a lot of great smaller ones that need more attention. Recently, I came across the Myth Monsters podcast, which is described on the website as a bite-sized look into the monsters of global folklore and mythology with Aaron, a massive mythology nerd. Jump in and learn about your favorite monsters from Gorgons to Kelpies to Wendigos to Bigfoot. Stay spooky every Thursday. So I immediately liked this show. Erin has a great podcast voice, and she's obviously very excited about her topics. There's an introduction to her on the website as well. It says she's from Essex in the UK, and she's had a huge love for mythology since she was a kid reading the Iliad. She has a passion for monsters, as well as true crime and the supernatural. I think she and I would get along really well. Her favorite monsters are Kelpies, Gorgons, and the Loch Ness Monster, but the Mothman is a guilty pleasure. And as far as I'm concerned, no guilt here. I love Mothman. There's a great episode of BuzzFeed Unsolved about him, and it's really funny because they're kind of obsessed with the fact that the statue of Mothman has it just has like a six-pack. Like, he's just ripped, and it's really amusing. Anyway. Erin works on Myth Monsters on her own as a side project, and she is working towards her PhD in myth studies at the same time, which just sounds like such an awesome thing to study, honestly. And then she also lists her reasons why people should choose her podcast over other mythology podcasts. What sets it apart, you know? And some of them are the things that I like most about this show, so I thought I'd just share her list of reasons too. So first of all, she focuses on the monsters, including their origins, descriptions, real-life sightings or comparisons. And she doesn't really get into like the elaborate hero stories necessarily, which I appreciate. I like a good hero story, but they're very long, they're very involved, and usually the monsters are just kind of like sprinkled in there, and they're the most interesting part. She also covers monsters that are not just in well-known mythology, but from every country and culture around the world, which is really cool because I know a lot about certain mythos, but I know there's a bunch of cool ones that I know nothing about. Every time I hear about one that's from a different culture, it's like so cool and fascinating. So these are really enjoyable episodes. And they're only like 15 minutes, 20 minutes long. She calls it bite size. It's a good length. She's also respectful and has heavily researched the opinions on the different monsters from different cultures. And then she also talks about current modern media titles where you can see these monsters, like in TV, film, video games. It's been kind of interesting to hear where some of these things are referenced. It's a really excellent show. I started out listening because she had an episode about the Baba Yaga, and I love the Baba Yaga. It is such a messed up tale, but it's one of my favorites, and so I listened to that episode first, and then I was pretty much hooked, and I've been kind of binging it since then. And then also, once I got onto the website for the podcast, there was a link to a book of Erin's poetry. She is also apparently a playwright and a poet, and I was psyched to get to check out her work. And this is where the brief language warning is going to come in, so just skip ahead a little bit. But this week, I want to talk about To the People I Have Loved, Fucked, Tried to Fuck Before, the collection by Erin Kulf. So on Amazon, she describes her book as a collection of poems about the romantic plights of the modern woman, from teenagedom to adulthood, looking at the constantly changing dating scene, but the unending change to awkward, funny, and tragic experiences in modern life. Based on experiences from women she's known and shared coffee and tall tales with, and the stories from her own experiences. So, relationships and poetry go together like peanut butter and chocolate. It's a classic combination. These poems deal with relationships and the roller coasters of romantic life, and I really enjoyed this collection. They were beautifully written, and they're very relatable. There was one that kind of struck me right away. It was called Predatory. It discusses the very different portrayal of the same situation, depending on if you are the guy or the girl in the situation. And it's very honest and very raw. Another one I really liked was called Pierced Princess. I especially liked the ending, which I'm going to share with you. As a gift, a jar, bursting with notes on lined paper, handwritten, reasons to live, title too fitting. Many years later, occasional chatter, you unknowing, those messages still keep me going. I'm terrible at reading poetry, but I really, really enjoyed that part. There were a lot of really good ones in here. A few other titles of the ones that I particularly enjoyed were Nunchucks, Koi Fish, Middle Name Danger, Tenure in Mass Effect, and Pink Tool Disaster. I mean, just from the names, you know those are going to be good. Anyway, I am going to put Erin's website in the show notes, and I highly suggest that you check out both her book and her podcast. They are both fantastic, and she has a really great energy, so I would love it if you'd go out and support her. And now it is time for a quick break. When I come back, I have got the most popular cat breeds worldwide and a new chapter of my weekly writing project. Be right back. Welcome back, book lovers. It's time to talk about cats. So I was looking for interesting cat facts recently, and I found a list of the 12 most popular cat breeds. This is from thesprucepets.com. I thought it'd be fun to look at. It was updated at the beginning of January 2023, so it's pretty recent. Personally, I have never worried about the breed of my cats. They have mostly come out of a cornfield, so who knows what they are. But I guess I do find breeds interesting. I don't support breeding. I don't think it's a great idea, but it is interesting. Anyway, here is the Spruce Pets top 12 cat breeds for feline lovers. Okay, so the first is Siamese. Siamese have distinct markings called points that are the areas of coloration on their face, ears, feet, and tail. There's two varieties of Siamese cats. There's one that has an apple-shaped head with a chubbier body, and the other features a larger head with a slender body. Kind of like the ones from Lady and the Tramp, I would guess. Lady and the Tramp is a great Disney animated film that features... Actually, I don't know if it's great. I don't know if it holds up. I liked it as a kid, but, times have changed. And Lord knows some of that stuff does not hold up. Anyway, this features singing Siamese cats that demonstrates their intelligence and vocal skills, because Siamese make interesting sounds. Many Siamese cats that have originated from Thailand had a kink in their tail, but that trait has mostly been bred out at this point, although you can see them in street cats in Thailand. And then we have Persian. These are gorgeous cats too. They can come in almost any color, and they have a flat face when compared to most other breeds of cats. They're featured in all kinds of movies and artwork and commercials, and they have been one of the most popular breeds for decades. Which I believe. They are gorgeous. I worry about the flat faces, though. I think it makes it hard for them to breathe. Up next is one of my favorites, a Maine Coon cat. These cats are insane. They are a gentle giant. They are great hunters, and they were popularized after the CFA recognized them as a purebred in the late 1970s. They remain one of the most popular cat breeds. And this is something I didn't know. Does make sense, though. Many of them have polydactylism, which means they have extra toes on their already gigantic feet. I love cats with extra toes. I love giant Maine Coon cats. The cats are like the size of a dog. If I was ever going to get a breed of any kind, it would be a Maine Coon. Love them. Also, their larger feet act as snowshoes, which is pretty cool. Up next is the ragdoll. They get their name from their docile temperament. They tend to go limp when you pick them up, much like a rag doll. At one time, people thought they couldn't feel pain, but that is not true. That's so sad. Because they were testing that to see if it felt pain, and it just was too, timid to do anything. That's sad. Anyway, then we have the Bengal. Oh my God, these are beautiful cats too. Their markings make them look more like they belong in a jungle rather than your home, but they are domesticated. They're also apparently really talkative, and they require a lot of exercise. They really if you want to have a cat in your house that looks like it should be living in the wild, the Bengal is the way to go. My God, they're gorgeous. Next is the Abyssinian. Personality-wise, they are active, curious, and frequently follow their owners around the house. They are playful and have a dog-like demeanor that endears them to their humans, which is pretty cute. Next is the Burmans, which I hadn't heard of before. They were the original stock for breeding ragdolls, so they look very similar, but they do have slightly different markings and personalities. They're fun social cats that love attention, but they only want attention from their chosen person. They're more of a one-person cat than other cats would be. They would not do well in my house. You have to be able to deal with other cats and a dog. Up next is the Oriental Shorthair, which looks like a Siamese, but it is a separate breed. They usually have green eyes, as opposed to Siamese, and they have many color patterns and colors. They can also have long hair. Oriental Shorthairs are apparently prone to getting skin cancer and getting cold due to a lack of fur, so you often see them wearing sweaters. And speaking of sweaters, the next one is the Sphinx. The Sphinx cats are unique due to their lack of fur, and they are very social, active, and sort of dog-like felines. They look like they belong in the laps of royalty, but they're really playful and goofy, and they act more like a court jester despite their regal appearance. I'm warming up to the Sphinx cat. My oldest is obsessed with them. He really wants one. It's never going to happen because I think they're also super expensive. I don't know. It's just what an odd creature. It kind of reminds me of a house elf, Anyway. Next is the Devon Rex, which was another one that I had never heard of, and it is wild looking. It kind of reminds me of Smokey Christmas, who is our newest addition, who still kind of looks crazy and, a little wild. Apparently, the Devon Rex is a playful, active cat that is described as a monkey in a cat suit, which might be too much. I don't know. They have a lively and sweet disposition, and they are also trainable and adept at learning tricks. Next is the Himalayan, which honestly, this is the third type of cat with the same general look. And I kind of have to wonder if people have any idea. Do they know what they're getting? I guess if it's a purebred, they do. Anyway. Himalayans were bred from crossing Persian and Siamese to achieve their color points. They love attention and affection from their owners, and they have very sweet personalities and are playful. So far, all of these cats have had sweet personalities and are playful. I think that's just cats. Maybe not all of them. I've met some not sweet cats, but still. Okay, and next we have the American Shorthair. These are often confused with the domestic mixed breed cats, but they are purebred. Its breed name changed from domestic shorthair cats in 1966 to differentiate them. It's a medium-sized cat with a gentle nature, and it makes a great companion for families with children or other pets. The American Shorthair is one of the most popular pedigreed cat breeds in North America. And they're cute. They just kind of look like a standard issue cat, you know? All of these cats, honestly, are super cute, but I will stick with my mutts. They are beautiful and they're completely unique. And honestly, some of the health problems that come along with purebreds are just too much. Like, maybe I'm lazy, maybe I'm lacking some sort of nurturing quality, but I don't know. It doesn't seem worth it to me just for some color points or whatever, you know? Anyway, now it is time for the quote of the week. And this week's quote comes from the poem Predatory from Aaron Kolf's collection. And it's just the beginning of it. It begins like this. Mature, you said. Thank you, it's the trauma. Those two lines made me laugh, and I definitely relate. I get that immediately. And I knew right from this line that I was really going to enjoy this whole collection. I love it when poems can have a little bit of humor in them, especially when addressing something that's not humorous at all. It's a nice way to start. It is once again time for a new chapter of my weekly writing project, which is currently titled Ocean Eyes. Please keep in mind that this comes straight from my brain to you guys with no editing, so be kind while you listen. It'll get edited eventually into a book. But anyway, this week is chapter 15. Enjoy. Rhea opened her eyes to darkness. Her body ached, and when she tried to move, she found her wrists were bound tight with a thin rope that cut into her skin. Her wrists screamed in pain whenever the rope shifted. It was burrowed deep and covered in a crust of dried blood. Her ankles were free, but a chain was shackled around her middle and attached to a thick metal ring set into the cement wall. The chain was heavy. Rhea struggled to stand under the weight of it. It took a few tries, and when she managed to stay upright, she found the chain was incredibly short, less than 4 feet. She could only move in a small arc around the point where she'd located the ring. Rhea took a deep, shaky breath. Panic threatened to bloom in her heart, but she squashed it as quickly as she could. She was not one to panic, or fall prey to any of her emotions, really. Rhea was trained to remain cool and detached. Always. Even now, tied up and chained to a wall in a mysterious room. Even now, tied up and chained to a wall in a mysterious room, taken by an unknown assailant, and blind. When she told Morena that she couldn't see a thing, she hadn't just meant her visions. Her ability to read people had been waning in the last few years, no doubt being drained by the very peace tree she'd helped to erect all those years ago. The thing she'd lost everything for was now taking everything she had left. But for now, her concern was in the here and now. She was blind. She opened and closed her eyes, but nothing changed. This was what was bringing on the panic. She was not prepared for this. She had been a woman of many great talents and wisdom, the strongest magic of all the children of death. A mind reader. Even with all these gifts, she worked hard. She tried to prepare for anything, and it had served her well over the decades she'd traveled with Morena. But she had never considered blindness. A huge oversight. Rhea had to smirk at the horrible irony. There was no time for self-pity now, though. She considered her options, but there didn't seem to be any. Sit or stand, sleep or not. That was all. Rhea could do nothing but wait, and patience had never been her strength. Morena opened her eyes to the muted dark green light of the clearing. She was seated amid the great and ancient trees of the deep woods. After finding Rhea gone, Serd had quickly located another boar, and they rode day and night until they reached the very oldest part of the mighty forest. She left Serd and the boars at the edge of the inner kingdom. Only the most ancient and powerful could enter there, and Morena could only step foot inside the kingdom walls because she bore the mark of the Death Witch. There was no gate, just an open stone archway cut into the dense wall. There was no need for a door. Had Serd stepped through that gateway, he would have immediately dissolved into ashes. Even with her protective powers, Morena felt a shudder pass through her as she walked through the archway. She knew better than to turn back. She wouldn't be able to see Serd anyway, and the Guardians now followed her. Looking at them would be death, no matter who she was, and it was a pointless endeavor. In the book, the Guardians had been described as horrific monsters, some the size of mountains, that were only visible to a handful of beings. To most, they were completely invisible. The only indication of their presence was a sudden chill that passed over any it touched. They would shudder one after another, and though they all knew the ancient stories, none would dare to believe they'd been so close to something so awful. It was best to ignore them. It didn't guarantee safety, but it made them less tense and less likely to overreact. They didn't want to be perceived, and if they were, chaos and destruction followed. The walk through the inner kingdom was terribly slow. Morena's apprehension grew with each step. There was no turning back. She could only move forward, and she hated the trapped feeling it gave her. Still, she pushed on. Tears began streaming down her cheeks. She couldn't stop them. Fear was vibrating every cell of her being. The inner kingdom was uneventful. The same path continued through the forest. The trees were even wider and darker. The shadows were thick underneath, and the silence around her was maddening. It almost had texture, it was so heavy. The path narrowed as she approached the very center, the place she now sat. The trees crowded her as she drew close. The center point stood before her. It was the biggest tree she had ever seen. Enormous wasn't a big enough word. It was the width of a small building and covered in rough black bark. Tufts of moss decorated the crannies, and long, pale green vines hung down from the nearest branches. Higher up, the branches were wrapped in thick webs, belonging to a rare type of massive spider that only dwelled in the deep woods. They rarely came out and were extremely skittish. Morena was deeply grateful for that. Her terror was steadily growing. Her body shook uncontrollably now. The giant tree gave off a vicious energy, and it took every ounce of her remaining energy not to turn and run for her life. She would have no life if she did. And there was Yada. She couldn't leave the girl at the hands of whatever horrible being dared to wield the ancient magic. She had to keep going. Each staggering step took incredible effort. Finally, Morena's legs gave out, and she dropped to her knees between two massive roots. She bowed her head to the ground and continued to let the tears flow. She could do nothing else. She was struggling to breathe and couldn't even find the strength to lift her head from the dirt. There was a shuffling sound behind her. She groaned a little when she remembered the Guardians. There was nothing she could do. If they wanted to kill her, they would. Morena felt a little relief at the idea. She didn't know what was coming next, but she knew that it was the beginning of another terrible time. She didn't know if she was up for another fight. The ground under her forehead was humming. The roots were vibrating and the air thrummed with the powerful energy. It still made Morena uncomfortable, but at least it felt less sinister now. With a whoosh of cool air, Morena was lifted high into the air. Her heart hammered painfully as she watched the ground rush away from her. But she came to a gentle stop and hovered midair. Slowly she was rotated until she was facing away from the mighty tree and staring directly into the searing red eyes of the most horrific creature she had ever seen. A guardian. Morena wobbled in the air as she tried in vain to escape. The creature cracked what she assumed was a smile. Its features shifted like smoke across the scarred face. Massive, flat teeth and a pair of razor-sharp incisors were put on show when the creature laughed. With a wave of its hand, Morena spun like a top and came to a stop before the other hideous guardian. This one was smoother-skinned and gray. Its eyes were grayish-blue and a little kinder, but its teeth were far more terrifying, like a mouthful of thin, sharp needles. This guardian scooped her up in another cool rush of air and lowered her into a crevice amongst the roots of the massive tree. She was cradled snugly and surrounded by the hum of the tree. Morena tried to keep her eyes open, but her eyelids were so heavy. She blinked, and then fought to keep them from closing again. Another blink. The guardians were watching her with blank expressions on their hideous faces. They each raised a hand, and Morena felt them take control. Her eyelids fell, and their gruesome faces were the last sight she saw. They were gone when she woke. Her eyes adjusted slowly to the murky light. She was upright, seated with her back against the wide trunk. The ragged bark had scraped a section of her lower back raw. She gently probed the wound, and her fingers came back bloody. Morena raised her eyes toward the canopy overhead. The dark tangle of branches formed an almost complete cover. But there was one small opening. A shaft of silver light shone down on the place where she sat. She closed her eyes and let the light warm her face. The forest was oppressively silent. It made her tense, but she forced herself to wait. Just a little longer. It took a while, but she finally heard it. Bells rang faintly in the distance. Light footsteps shuffled the debris of the forest floor. Morena opened her eyes, but she remained seated as fear surged through her veins. There was no point in trying to run away. A slight little man appeared amongst the massive trees. He hopped nimbly over the roots until he stood before her. He was breathing heavily, and sweat formed among the wrinkles of his shiny, bald head. He gathered the long green robes he wore and gave her a low, reverent bow. "Come," he hissed, and extended his thin, gnarled hand to her. His voice was a terrible whisper that sent icy fingers dancing along her spine. Morena hesitated just a moment, and the little man's eyes flashed with anger. "She waits for you," he continued. "She does not like waiting." Morena checked the urge to shudder at the man's voice, and she rose slowly from her seat. Her body ached all over, and her limbs were stiff. She struggled to her feet without taking the little man's hand, and he huffed indignantly before turning his back on her. He began hopping blithely from root to root, and she clambered after him as best she could. Eventually she lost sight of him, but he did leave behind a trail. A light greenish glow marked his route, so Morena continued on deeper into the ancient forest. She lost her grip on the final root and dropped to the hard, needle-strewn forest floor. Her knees buckled on impact, and she collapsed. She put out her hands to catch herself, and her palm had found a sharp stone. The point of it ripped through the skin, and she left a fresh smear of red on the pointed white rock. Morena heard a sound like rusty hinges, and the wind through bare tree branches. She looked up to find the little man standing nearby, laughing. "Come on," Morena said irritably as she got to her feet. "She's waiting, right?" The little man wiped the tears from his eyes and grinned. "Yes, yes," he nodded. "And she grows impatient." Morena sighed. Her entire body hurt, and she wasn't entirely sure what she was doing here. "Fine," she said at last. The little man bounded away, and she limped down the path as quickly as she could. Doubt gnawed at her as she went. Morena was not certain this was the right choice. Something felt off, but she couldn't place it. Still, her main focus at the moment was rescuing Yada. She had only a vague idea of what she was up against, and she didn't entirely believe she would make it through alive. But Yada was in danger. If she could at least save her, Morena would consider her job done. They came at last to a clearing. White birch trees surrounded the flat circle of earth that was ringed by glittery granite boulders. The sky above the clearing was open and bright blue. Golden sunlight filtered through the birches, and the whole area glowed as if on fire. Morena gasped when she saw it. The little man spun around and grinned. His face folded into a multitude of wrinkles, and his eyes sparkled with pride. "Is it not beautiful?" he rasped. "It's lovely," Morena agreed in a hushed voice. The magic of the clearing was strong. It was old, far older than even the trees that now held it, born long before this version of the world even existed. She was in such awe that she didn't immediately notice the woman sitting on one of the smaller boulders. She was ancient herself, even older than the impish little man. She wore long white and gray robes that glittered like the stones surrounding her. Her hair was snow white and fell in long, loose waves down past her shoulders. She was watching Morena with her pale, icy eyes. Though a smile played on her lips, there was no warmth there. They stared at each other for a long moment. Morena cleared her throat, but the woman spoke first. "Sit," she said, pointing to another nearby boulder. Her voice thundered and boomed, which was odd compared to her tiny stature. She spoke the word in a terse, clipped manner, as if it tasted bad. Mirena stepped into the clearing cautiously, but as the magic washed over her, she grew lighter. The aches and pains disappeared. She touched the wound on her lower back gingerly, and found it was completely healed. The woman was smiling now, and there was a little more warmth in it. She relaxed her stiff posture and leaned back against another boulder. "Feel better?" Mirena nodded. She didn't dare to speak. It was impossible to read this woman, and she wasn't yet sure if she was friend or foe. "I'm a friend, Mirena," the woman said. "You may not be able to read me, but I see right to the very heart of your being. I understand you, and you don't need to be afraid. Many fear me, and many should. But you, I would like to eventually call my sister." Mirena frowned. "I haven't had a lot of luck with family before now." "I know. I'm sorry about that. Unfortunately, the one thing unchangeable is the past." The woman sat up and leaned in close. Her voice was too loud, and it made Mirena wince. "I know what you need, and I will help you. In fact, I believe we can help each other." "How so?" The woman laughed. It sounded like stone striking stone and the creaking of trees in the wind. Mirena shivered despite her best efforts to fight it, and that made the woman laugh harder. "Do you know me, child?" The woman peered out from her beautiful white hair. "I am the very soul of the forest. I am ageless, timeless. There was a time when I was the very center of this world. It was a harmonious time, and it lasted for ages, until a certain group of dark-hearted ones decided to resurrect an ancient and terrible evil, one I had already subdued long ago." She huffed irritably and blew a loose lock of hair from her eyes. It settled right back into place, and she rolled her eyes. "Do you know how hard it was the first time? Of course not. No one can even comprehend the level of evil those stupid, vain women unleashed on the world. For what? Beauty? Eternal life? Trust me, neither of them are that great." "What does this have to do with me? I may be a child of death and carry their blood, but I never even knew my mother. She got rid of me almost immediately after I was born." The woman frowned. "Yes, I heard about all of that. And she was supposed to be the smart one. She was the secret keeper, after all. She was supposed to do everything by the book. Those girls strayed very, very far off course." Though she bore no love for any part of her past, Mirena couldn't help but smile to hear the wicked and supremely powerful dark-hearted ones referred to as if they were a group of naughty little girls. "This is why I need you. The children of death will bring back life to the valley." Mirena jumped to her feet. "That's from the book," she exclaimed. "I remember that part." The old woman nodded vigorously. "Yes, good." She was smiling. "I wrote that, you know. I was the very first secret keeper." She reached out and took Mirena's hands. Her grip was incredibly strong, and she squeezed even harder when Mirena tried to pull away. "And you are the last. I know about the book. There will be no secrets soon. No need for a keeper. I bet that sounds like freedom to you. But first, there is work that must be done." "What about Yada?" Mirena couldn't keep the edge of irritation out of her voice. The old woman noticed, and she smiled. "Our enemy is the same. The great evil is already here, and they are the ones who have your friend. We will talk more at the palace. If you agree to help me, that is." Mirena nodded silently, and the woman nodded once in return. "Very good. It is agreed." She smiled brightly at Mirena and raised her thin, bony arm. Glittery stone bangles adorned her tiny wrist. With a sweeping wave of her hand, the world around them began to change. And that is the end of Chapter 15 of my weekly writing project. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you have enjoyed this kind of different episode. If you did, leave a review wherever you're listening to this, and tell your friends. They might enjoy some books and cats chat too. And of course, you can find all of my writing at frapmedia.com. And also be sure to check out the Myth Monsters podcast and Erin's book of poetry. I will put her website in the show notes. I hope you have a wonderful week full of good books and furry friends. Take care of yourselves, book lovers. And until next time, keep reading.